Capability, who will present his paper on South Korea defense. Dr. Fu-Kuo, you have 15 minutes. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I just missed to introduce Dr. Fu-Kuo. Dr. Fu-Kuo is an associate researcher specialized in Asia and the Pacific at the National Chingenti in Taiwan, and he is the head of the Taiwan Center for Security for Studies, a PhD holder in political science from Hull University of the UK. He was the Dean of the International College for Innovation at the Chingishti University, and head of research at the American and European Studies, and also worked at the Foreign Ministry of Taiwan. His research focuses on the security in Asia and the Pacific, and the geopolitics, and peace, the Taiwan Strait, and the American strategy, foreign and the Taiwanese security studies. Dr. Liu would present his paper on beefing up Taiwan's defense capability in countering potential conflict in the Taiwan Strait. We will have 15 minutes. Please.
Good morning. Thank you so much for this kind introduction. I want to start by thanking the main organizer, Dr. Omar. And this is a really impressive gathering. This is not so big a scale, but almost like a small United Nations gathering here. We have people from East Asia, Europe, and also Central East European country. I think over the last 2 days, colleagues share very much with me. We have learned tremendously, and listening especially very various perspectives, which I consider in this particular complicated situation. This is exactly what we should be doing, meeting, exchanging, and learning from each other. Hopefully, we will be able to proceed with initiative coming out of our discussion. So maybe toward the end of my short presentation today, I will come with a couple of recommendations, especially to Dr. Omar, which take in this particular occasion, organizing not just a conference itself, but also separate dialogue and talks. And I'm so glad that this is a first particular occasion for East Asian, because this panel will be covering. And over the last 2 days, it happens that Ukraine's war enters into another new era, fourth year. But of course, internationally, everyone is feeling uncertain and also challenging because the United States president is putting dramatic different policy orientation to everyone. So in my presentation, I would briefly touch upon the current Taiwan security challenge. I learned over the last 2 days, so in order to get everyone's interest, so I would try not to put up the language, the wordings inside, instead of putting up more security maps. So starting from very beginning, and I'm hoping our friends not from East Asia will gradually get to understanding what exactly the situation over there. Can I have a technician helping me to shift the screen? I cannot shift to my PowerPoint. Okay. Yes. Uh, Today I will be addressing quickly on how Taiwan would be able to defend ourselves, cope with tremendous security threat from China. I don't want to repeat what it has been discussed globally since the year 2022. The economists already put up the cover page. The title is Taiwan is the most dangerous place on earth. Since then on, in Taiwan, I receive friends from Europe, from other part of the world. As soon as they arrive, the first question they ask me, when People Liberation Army from China will be invading. And I thought that was quite a stunning question because people living in Taiwan, we do have a different perspective. So people coming around and trying to learn. And obviously, this is also a complicated situation. I hope in the remaining time, I will be able to address to those key questions. I know I just hear that hopefully this particular issue will not be distracted with Britain and also Irish issue there yesterday. Okay, so my main focus in the next 10 some minutes mainly will be covering Taiwan security threat perception and also China's military threat, Taiwan's responses, and also pressing efforts on modernizing national defense. But since everyone knows Taiwan does not have that many diplomatic allies recognizing the status quo, the sovereignty of the Republic of China. So outside of Taiwan, many people recognize Taiwan as the name Taiwan. Basically, this is a geographic name, not the full name of the nation. On the passport, we have a Republic of China. But I think, surprisingly, on the way in 3 days ago, I was stopped in the immigration because our passport presented Taiwan. And the visa I received was printing China. So they confused, so they stopped me for almost 2 hours to consult and investigate whether I should change my visa. Finally, everything is settled. So this is the first one. We have not had sufficient diplomatic recognition. So as you all know, it makes Taiwan so difficult, even if our pocket may have sufficient money, but we cannot procure sufficient weapons we want. So globally, there is only one superpower, the United States, would be able to withstand Chinese pressures, consistently showing its strong support to Taiwan, selling reasonable, important weapons to Taiwan. So let me quickly go into currently Taiwan's threat perception. I have summarized into a few areas. Of course, everyone recognizes Chinese military threat. But the second one is domestic political division. After all these years, Taiwan carried the name Republic of China, but the new generation identify themselves more as a Taiwanese, nothing to do with Chinese. So in the society, we gradually develop into two substantial groups. On the one side, we want to get closer to the United States, a Western country. But on the other side, we want to get relations maintaining with good friends, but we also want to connect back with mainland China. So this is something, as you can tell, whenever party change in Taiwan, different party take different position, the security tension will be substantially different. So this is also somewhat threatening from within our own society. The third one is uncertain international support. Even the United States, from various politicians, re-emphasizing many times, in due course, in time of a crisis, the U.S. will come to support defending Taiwan. But looking into a number of critical examples happening, Ukraine, Afghanistan, we gradually realize the U.S. may be supporting Taiwan, but not directly engaging in the Taiwan contingency. So that would be something, other than the United States, this would be somewhat hopeful, because we are not quite sure in time of a crisis, even our neighbors, immediate neighbor, Japan, will be able to engage in the Taiwan contingency. But I think we have a close dialogue with Japanese society and experts. We realize politically, unless the US engage, Japanese will not directly engage. So there is a mutual defense treaty between Japan and the United States. So I can set uncertain international support. That is something. So over the years, Taiwanese people and our security decision makers think that we need to do it our own. But of course, we're trying to stretch up our connection and links with neighboring country and international support. But I really doubt, because I also have quite a number of occasions meeting with our European colleagues and friends. And I know they normally said diplomatic, moral support. That's all about it. I'm not quite sure how much in time of a crisis Taiwan would be able to receive. And the fourth one is cybersecurity and information warfare. I would briefly touch upon and leave for Q&A later, because this is something we realize. Every day, Taiwan will be hacked by mostly Chinese hackers. The frequency goes up on the daily basis, 500,000 frequency. So if you are talking about Taiwan is one of the leading hackers attacking country in the world. And if I said traditional war between China and Taiwan may not have happened, but I can tell everyone cyber security and cyber attack conducted almost on a daily basis. We also gradually build on our technology strengths. We also come up with countermeasures. So this war on this cyber dimension already started long before. And this is something many people cannot realize and cannot understand. But I can report to you, this is something going on at least for more than a decade or so, fighting fiercely. And whenever there is a new technology comes up, we have to really quickly adapt into high tech in order to defend from the cyber dimension. The fifth one is a strategic vulnerability. I think Taiwan is located at a very pivotal strategic position in the west part of the Pacific, but we know strategically Taiwan is very vulnerable. We are surrounded by ocean, and China would be easily blockade or conduct all kind of exercise. So later I will show several maps surrounding Taiwan. And of course, currently the big challenge is our internal politics. So far, if we are talking about integrated defense policy, it is quite unlikely. Even now, the ruling party cannot really integrate different voices from within our society. So vis-a-vis this super challenge from Beijing, I do think this would be something we will have to overcome in years ahead. So let me quickly shift to the map. This is a satellite image and also combining with a military map. If I can, it's not showing, okay. On this particular map, hopefully you can gradually get to the geographic situation. Taiwan is about 100 kilometers away from China, and this particular rectangle is Taiwan's ADIZ. But this ADIZ was drawn back in almost early 50s. So we are still, as you can tell, this yellow rectangle cover the other part of mainland China. When the situation was managed well by Taiwan, when China military was not so capable, our Air Force, American Air Force, would also be able to conduct surveillance along the coastline frequently. I know the American Air Force from Okinawa, which is island, the islands on the northeast of Taiwan, conducted daily reconnaissance surrounding mainland China. But of course, almost 2 decades before, when Chinese technology and military became so much powerful, they have trying to push the U.S. and also Taiwan out of their coastline, especially. So on this particular map, it carries a significant meaning. In the past, we thought Taiwan's contingency would be just between mainland China and Taiwan. But looking into this map, from the top north of this particular map, North and South Korea, Japan, and even some part of Russia, Far East naval fleet would frequently comes down to Yellow Sea and East China Sea, together with the US, and also on the bottom, we have the Philippines and also Vietnam. So whenever things are happening lately, we know South China Sea, Taiwan contingency, East China Sea, Yellow Sea, and even including the Bohai Bay, connecting with the Korea Peninsula. So this is currently the strategy's perspective. We have already broadened our scope looking into this strategic picture. If something does happening along the Taiwan coast, then it will start from our neighbors, from the South China Sea and also Korea Peninsula. And this particular map in Taiwan, we are calculating just shifting the direction. So if you remember the map, the east is now on your left. So this is another map. From this map, it just shows that Taiwan is at a pivotal position. And with this purple color, it means that these are high density of population living, surrounding. And actually, Taiwan is surrounded by a huge populated country. China, 1.4 billion population, and Japan would have 200 million population, right down our ocean to the Philippines. Philippines currently has more than 100 million population. Vietnam just across 100 million population scale. So Taiwan is standing in between among these populated country. So basically, from this particular map, it shows that highly populated region. And if something really goes wrong, the war, so many people will be affected. This is the message I want to carry through. The next slide, it shows that different color reflected Chinese military exercise over the last 3 years since Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. These different color, the first group of those zones happened back in August 2022. And then it came last year after our new president, current president, Lai Ching-te, arrived. And almost a few days after his inauguration, China conducted another Joint Source 2024A exercise. And then in October last year, another round of exercise. But from this map, it just basically shows that China is increasing not just military pressures, but also on the last exercise, naval vessels joined by Coast Guard ships surrounding Taiwan and also surrounding our offshore island closer to mainland China. So this would be the scenario Taiwan would have to face. But the good question is, actually 3 days ago when I met some of the colleagues here, and the first question is when this war will be starting. But my response is it depends on where you stand for. If you are standing for the government in Taiwan, the war may be coming. But if you are standing for Taiwan society, I don't think the war is coming in because China is now utilizing very skillful strategy, dual strategy. On the one side, completely cut off official links with Taiwan, but of course, opening up another dimension, opening up social communication. So people like myself, I can easily travel back and forth, mainland China. And I can just share one specific data. Currently, we still have 835 flights across the Taiwan Strait every week. So with this high demand from the society of the two across the Taiwan Strait, it means that there is something not as people thinking outside of the region. So because not enough time, I want to quickly show this map in particular. This is on this military exercise, China utilizing the newly built aircraft carrier battle group, cruising into different dimensions. On the right, that was one time when they conducted exercise. There are something comparing with USS Nimitz closer to Guam, and that would be the future scenario if something happening between US and China. We do believe eastern part of Pacific, closer to Guam area, may be the aircraft carrier battleground for US and China. But they are showing their power. I don't think that they will be really opening up the fire against each other. So Taiwan consistent effort of strengthening defense capability. Facing with such a great challenge, people may be curious how much Taiwan will be able to do. But my view is simply strengthening our defense capabilities. We are not going to match up with the number 3, number 2 in the world currently, such a high power Chinese People Liberation Army. So instead of purely focusing on defense build up, we will have to, of course, strengthening our defense capability. As you can imagine, for smaller counterpart in such a scenario, it is quite reasonably we have to move to asymmetric warfare preparation. So this is exactly what we are doing, enhancing our technology, military technology, and also building strong international allies, which is so difficult part. Whenever I have been representing Taiwan to various occasions for security dialogue, every time when people know that I'm from Taiwan, they will just try to show their conservative attitude, because if China representative is around, that would be something quite challenging. So let me quickly conclude my presentation today to show further Taiwan's effort. From this particular map, there are several circles surrounding Taiwan. It shows that Taiwan, in a way, to develop a symmetric warfare strategy, we have made Taiwan as one of the most density missile deployment area in the world. So even Chinese air pilot, fighters pilot, recognize there are so many short-range or medium-range missile Taiwan procure. Also, we develop based on our technology. So there are several. The longest distance is we are now developing into 2,000 kilometers range, medium range. So this is our production for now. Taiwan is a democratic society. We are open trading company. And this military effort is almost inevitable, pushed by the strategic situation. before we can move into the peaceful stage. This is exactly what we have to do. So finally, I just want to show this final slide. The range we are developing, covering up to Beijing area, that is the longest range we developed by our technology, surface-to-surface missile system. I think they have tasted several runs successfully, and I just hope we will not be using this. China will not fire against Taiwan as well. So let me quickly conclude with a few words. Thank you for Honey's patience. The first one in Taiwan, across a party line, every one of us recognize before we can talk, we need to strengthen our defense deterrence capabilities. And that is exactly what we want. We know that we cannot defeat such a huge army, but at least we can compromise and make them feeling more difficult. The first one, deterrence. The second one, de-escalation. We need to find a way to quickly de-escalate if something comes up. But these are all different dimensions: military dimension, national security dimension. Finally, I personally, as a civilian scholar, I do think the best strategy for Taiwan is that we need to engage with our adversary. If our current government completely cut off all the links and dialogue with China, it really put Taiwan into much more risky position. So this is the strong message in our society. I do hope we can gradually open up more dialogues with China. If we will be able to cope with differences, then the tension will be reduced substantially. I know on this particular occasion, making the presentation, not much time to go into every details, but I just want to bring up all the strategic point, leaving for our discussion. I enjoy very much the discussion yesterday. All the questions have been quite educational. So let me stop here. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you دكتور فو. شكرا جزيلا دكتور فو. المتحدث الثاني لدينا في هذه الجلسة هو
second speaker for this session, Insoo Kim, science professor in the military academic in South Korea. He is specialized in the and he is engaged in training future officers. He has a PhD in sociology from University of Wisconsin in Madison, and his studies focuses on the Northern Koreans' relations, and he focuses on the comparative studies to link theory to practice. His work has been widely published in Armed Force and Society Journal of Studies, Cornell Journal of Defense Analysis, and Korea Observers. Insoo Kim will speak today about the defense strategy and its dilemma, alliances or self-reliance first in South Korea. You have 15 minutes, Doctor. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, it's my great honor to be here today, and I also thank you, Dr. Ashur, for organizing this wonderful event. I would like to discuss South Korea's defense strategy, which is useful for understanding how small states implement alignment strategies to ensure national security. We are here to discuss the defense strategies of a small state. But South Korea is not a small state, but a middle power. With a population of over 50 million, South Korea has the fifth strongest military in the world, and it spends over 50 billion US dollars every day for its defense. However, within East Asia, South Korea remains relatively small compared to its neighboring countries like Russia, China, Japan, and especially North Korea, armed with nuclear weapons. Therefore, I will explore how South Korea, as a small state within East Asia, has managed to overcome potential conflict with its more powerful neighbors. First of all, I would like to introduce a brief historical background. Korea gained independence from Japanese rule at the end of the Second World War. Following the war, the Korean peninsula was divided, with the Soviet Union occupying the north and the United States occupying the south. In 1950, North Korea invaded the south in an attempt to unify Korea again under communist rule. However, the United States intervened quickly and ended the war with an armistice agreement in 1953. Since then, South Korea has faced persistent security threat from North Korea and has maintained a strong defense posture through its alliance with the United States. According to structural realism in defense studies, states facing security threat can choose either balancing or bandwagoning. Balancing is the dominant strategy, as bandwagoning rewards the other's aggression. Therefore, the theoretical prediction is that if a small state perceives a growing security threat, balancing tends to be the dominant strategy, particularly when allies are available. Great powers that a small state aligns with also have two choices: balancing and buck passing. Balancing entails providing small states with economic or military aid to incentivize them to align against a common adversary. Buck passing involves transferring the defense burden to small states. Balancing becomes more likely when a great power's relative capability is greater or when each neighboring state becomes more threatening. The table here shows 4 strategic combinations emerge based on the choices made by both a small state and a great power: chain ganging, hedging, internal balancing, and appeasement. This study argues that South Korea is situated in a strategic combination where it prefers status quo while the United States prefers balancing. To support this argument, I will demonstrate that South Korea's perceived threat from North Korea has weakened after the end of Cold War, while the US perceived threat from China has recently intensified. South Korea's perceived threat from North Korea is determined by a combination of factors, including North Korea's aggregate national power, aggressive capability, and intentions. I will show how these factors have declined over time. First, global power index values here indicate each country's share of global national power. In the 1960s, the difference between the two Koreas was minimal, but by the 1990s, the gap had widened significantly, implying that South Korea's perceived threat was not what it used to be after the 1990s. The second figure compares arms transfers to North and South Korea. After the 1990s, arms transfers to North Korea declined sharply. See red bar, while South Korea continued to acquire advanced weapon systems from the United States. Accordingly, South Korea gained a technological advantage over North Korea. In response to this inferiority in conventional arms race, North Korea developed nuclear weapons and missile systems. To deter North Korea's nuclear threat, South Korea adopted a self-reliant defense known as three-axis system. This system comprises three components: kill chain, Korea air and missile defense, and Korea massive punishment and retaliation. Despite the growing nuclear threat from North Korea, the three-axis system could have contributed to mitigating the perceived threat. The third figure here categorizes North Korea's military provocation by type and period. In the 1960s, most provocations occurred on land. Please see blue bar. Whereas maritime provocations became more common after the 1990s. Maritime provocations are generally less likely to escalate into full-scale conflict compared to land-based confrontations. This shift in provocation suggests that North Korea may have wanted to avoid escalating tensions into a full-scale crisis. So far, our data shows that South Korea's perceived threat from North Korea became weaker after the Soviet collapse in 1991. However, we still don't know what happened to the United States capability and threat perception. The figure illustrates the global power index trends for China, the United States, and Russia. Let's look at the left half of the graph. The Cold War period was characterized by US-Soviet bipolarity, but after Nixon doctrine in 1969, the United States decline transformed global power dynamics, and the United States began to deviating from balancing to buck passing. Following the Nixon doctrine, United States aid to South Korea declined sharply, eventually reaching near zero levels. Please see blue lines here. In response, South Korea increased military expenditure as it had to assume greater responsibility for its national defense. The investments made in the 1970s laid the foundation for today's Korean defense industry. The figure illustrated here the strengths of US Force Korea and South Korea's cost-sharing contributions. Despite steady decline in the number of US Force Korea, South Korea's financial contributions to maintaining American troops on its soil have increased. This rise in cost-sharing reflects South Korea's strategic concessions to the United States in defense burden sharing. Now, let's look at the right half of the graph. China's rapid economic growth in the 1990s, coupled with the United States economic downturn, allowed China to narrow the gap with the United States. The figure illustrates the shift from a US-Soviet bipolarity to a more multipolar system, with China playing an increasingly significant role. The figure here illustrates South Korean perceptions of a threat from four major countries: North Korea, China, the United States, and Japan. North Korea remains the most significant threat. Please see dark blue bar. But each threat perception is expected to decline to 20% in the future. Please see the sky blue bar. Instead, South Koreans will increasingly perceive China as a greater threat than North Korea. This trend is also evident in other countries in the region. The table presents the percentage of people who believe that China's military expansion negatively impact their country. This percentage has risen significantly, indicating a substantial shift in public sentiment against China. Given the strong perception of China as a threat over the past decade, United States moved toward balancing policy known as Pivot to Asia in 2011. So far, we have identified two key findings. First, South Korea's perceived threat from North Korea has weakened after the end of the Cold War. Second, the United States perceived the threat from China has recently intensified. In this situation, actively cooperating with the United States to counterbalance China could risk South Korea's entrapment in unwanted conflict. Therefore, South Korean experts usually say South Korea has no compelling reason to engage in military confrontation with China. So, the best strategy for South Korea may be a hedging, which strengthens security cooperation with the United States while enhancing economic cooperation with China. However, the hedging strategy has proven increasingly difficult as hegemonic conflict between US and China is created in East Asia. The figure shows a significant shift in South Korea's trade dynamics. In the early 1990s, the United States was South Korea's dominant export destination. But by the 2000s, export to China had surpassed those to the United States. South Korea's economic ties with China have made it more difficult for South Korea to maneuver effectively against Beijing. China could leverage its economic influence to signal its displeasure against South Korea whenever it wants. Here's a good example. By 2016, North Korea had conducted 5 nuclear tests. The United States urged South Korea to consider deploying the THAAD system, and it also wanted to strengthen trilateral cooperation with South Korea and Japan. This effort culminated in the establishment of GSOMIA, which China viewed as a direct challenge to its regional dominance and strategic interests. When South Korea decided to deploy THAAD system on its soil, China reacted strongly, prompting anti-Korean protests and widespread boycotts of South Korean products. South Korea made 3 key commitments to normalize its relations with China. First, no additional THAAD deployment on Korean soil. 2, no integration of its South Korea's missile system with the US missile defense. Third, no participation in a trilateral military alliance with the United States and Japan. This episode highlighted the challenges South Korea faces in balancing its relations between the United States and China. In essence, South Korea's self-defense system is insufficient to neutralize North Korean nuclear threat. The stronger the fear of being exploited by North Korea becomes, the closer the South Korea must align with the United States. Then, the closer alignment with the United States escalate China and Russia's perceived threat, resulting trilateral cooperation between China, Russia, and North Korea further amplifies South Korea's security concerns, trapping all parties in a security dilemma. This vicious cycle is a product of the multipolar system, but unfortunately, South Korea don't have the capacity to dismantle the broader international system on its own. If security dilemma is inevitable, South Korea must prevent it escalating into war. In other words, regional confidence building measures are essential to reduce mistrust, improve transparency, and foster cooperation. One key indicator of a country's commitment to confidence building measures is the exchange of military personnel. The table here presents data on the number of foreign military officers studying in South Korea. The quadrilateral security dialogue countries, United States, Japan, India, Australia, have maintained a consistently high and stable number of officers. In contrast, China's participation initially increased, but has recently dropped to zero. Moreover, there have been no officers from China. This highlights the limited progress in establishing regional confidence-building measures in East Asia. In conclusion, South Korea should take a leading role in building regional confidence-building measures to promote stability and security in East Asia. That concludes my presentation, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you Dr. إنسو. and المتحدث الثالث لدينا اليوم.
Presenter today is Mr. Inbum Chun. Inbum Chun is a retired general, lieutenant general who served in South Korean Army for 38 years, retiring in 2016. He commanded combat units from platoon to the division level, and his final command position was commanding general of the ROK Special Forces. He's also fondly referred as the father of the Combined Rockers Division. He has a PhD in political science, works with the Brookings Institute and U.S. Korea Institute under Johns Hopkins University. He was a fellow with the Sam Noon School at Georgia Tech. He has a Bronze Star Medal, 3 Legion of Merits. He is currently a senior fellow with the Associate of the United States Army. He advises many organizations, including the Korean Counterterrorism Studies Center in Sangnom, and is an active YouTuber in Korea, and he will talk to us today about North Korea's military capabilities from East Asia to East Europe. Thank you. شكرا جزيلا على هذه المقدمة التعريفية، وأشكر كذلك The Strategic Studies معهد الدراسات الاستراتيجية. أسعد الله صباحكم. في كوريا عندنا نقول أن القائد العسكري صاحب الحسنات أفضل من القائد العسكري الذي يمتلك المعرفة. ولكن أعظم القادة العسكريين هو القائد العسكري المحظوظ، ويبدو لي أن كيم جونغ أون قائد كوريا الشمالية أظن بأنه جنرال محظوظ إلى أبعد الحدود، ويتسبب بالعديد والكثير من المشكلات. طلب مني اليوم أن أقدم لكم جميعا وجهة نظري ما هي قدرات كوريا الشمالية، وخاصة القدرات العسكرية. ولكن لتحقيق ذلك أود أولا أن أعرفكم وأن أقدم لكم نسيج
North Korea. It is because understanding the fabric of North Korea is very important to understanding their capabilities. Although North Korea is reported to have 1.2 million men under arms, in reality, the entire country is a military camp. So among the 21 million North Koreans, most likely 6 to 10 million of them are fighters that can fight. They can shoot an AK, they can launch an RPG, they can pitch a tent, and they can fight very well. So that is the basic challenge that we have. So how do they do this? For one thing, North Korea, the leadership regime, has a very big advantage in that it has longevity. It's been around for 80 years. Since 1945, the Kim family has been ruling North Korea. and they've been very, very efficient. Now, if you look at Kim Jong-un, who is the leader right now, he's about 40 years old. His grandfather died at 82. His father died at 69. So if you look at the statistics, he's going to live for another 30 years. Easy. That means that regime, unless something catastrophic happens, will be around for the next 30 years. That will be 100 years of the Kim family. So the number one strength that that society has is that it is able to have a long-standing, I did that on purpose. Yeah, I'm not too tall, so, okay. So that's the first advantage that the North Korean society has. Secondly, North Korea is very talented at controlling information. Very talented. Every dictator in the world will envy North Korea. They not only can control information, but they can make the truth and have people believe it. In other words, North Korean leadership does not have to worry about public opinion. They make public opinion. And finally, the North Koreans are very, very resilient. I think the Ukrainians found out that they are very highly indoctrinated, that they are motivated. In reality, they are brainwashed into thinking that they live in a perfect world. The only problem is everybody else. Although they target the United States and people like myself, puppets of the United States, anybody who believes in freedom is a threat. Anyone who believes in truth is a threat to North Korea, because North Korea is about the Kim family. So in order to protect the Kim family, the North Koreans have brainwashed their society. Lastly, the North Koreans have a caste system, which is called the Songbun. The Songbun system came into establishment in 1950 by Kim Il-sung, the leader of all leaders in North Korea. He categorized his people into basically three categories: the core, which is about 30%, the wavering, or the middle class, about 40%, and the hostiles, which is another 30%. A subdivision of this category is about 50 categories. This is a social political classification system that is based on loyalty to the Kim family. So imagine that. You are going to be categorized by how loyal the system thinks you are to the Kim family. It's a fantastic system for dictators, and it works. This is how they are able to control their society. With the Songbun system, it decides how much you're going to get educated, what job you're going to hold, and what kind of food you're going to be provided. So this is a very, very effective way of controlling the population. Now I will talk more about the military capability. North Korea actually lived better than the South Koreans until the early 70s. They had a very powerful military. Like I said, the entire country is like a military fort. Everything that they have, everything that they make is for their military. And so, although the North Koreans might not have don't live as good as the South Koreans, on the military side, up until the 80s, they had a far superior military, conventional. But they knew they had a problem. Thousands of their tanks, all of their aircraft, they were as good as the South Korean aircraft and South Korean tanks until the 80s. But from the 90s, all of their tanks and all of their aircraft were getting old. They needed to replace them. And they knew they could not do that. And by chance, China and especially the Soviet Union collapsed. And so the North Koreans lost their benefactors. But being North Korea, they were prepared. So their alternative to protecting not just their society, but the Kim regime, was to develop nuclear weapons. Before nuclear weapons, North Koreans had chemical and biological weapons. Even now, there is ample evidence that the North Koreans are developing and are capable of using nerve agents and other kinds of weapons of mass destruction. But from the very beginnings, the North Koreans wanted nuclear weapons. And it started in 1965 when they were able to secure a deal with the Soviet Union for a research reactor, the IRT 2000, the IRT 2000. So it was a research reactor that they said that they would be using for peace, but in the end, it turned out that it led to the weaponization of nuclear technology. In order to have a viable nuclear capability, you need two things. Number one is a nuclear device. Number two is a delivery system. So the North Koreans, they not only acquired a nuclear reactor in the 60s, but by the early 80s was importing Scud missiles from Egypt. And within 10 years, they were exporting North Korean versions of the Scud missiles to the Middle East. So they progressed in that field as well. And we're seeing the products now in Ukraine. So if you look at North Korean missile development, it's not just ballistic missiles. It's cruise missiles, it's big missiles, it's little missiles, it's medium missiles. Why would they have so many varieties of missiles? Could it be that it's because they want to sell them? Most likely it is. They have a lot of missiles, and no matter what you tell people about them, they work, and it's getting better. Going to conventional weapons. North Koreans enjoyed selling their conventional weapons to third countries until a robust sanctions regime was established. Maybe $3 billion of small arms to various parts of the world existed. AK rifles, RPGs. The North Koreans have a very good RPG. Anti-tank missile systems. The Cornet, the North Koreans have it. The SA-16s, SA-7s, they have it. It's affordable and it's pretty good. But they also have a very alarming EW, electronic warfare capability. Now, when the Soviets collapsed and their Eastern Bloc nations collapsed, North Korea was starving. We think maybe 1 to 1.5 million North Koreans starved to death. We all know how horrible starving to death is. But North Korea endured that. Their system is able to endure that kind of punishment. But at the same time, the North Korean regime invited Romanian, Ukrainian, Polish scientists to their country and helped them with these kind of capabilities, not to mention nuclear development. So the North Koreans have this kind of conventional capability. We often refer to the North Koreans as a cyber superpower. China, United States, Israel, and North Korea. These countries are considered cyber superpowers. If you hear or read a report that some country has just been robbed of cryptocurrency, $10 billion, $30 billion, it's probably North Korea. We Koreans are attacked by North Korea on a daily average. Some estimates say 1 million times a day. So that's how active they are in cyber capability. And I mentioned about their capabilities with ChemBio. And they're willing to sell these capabilities, as we are seeing in Ukraine and Russia. This relationship just highlights that the North Korean Kim regime problem is not just a Korean problem or a Northeast Asia problem. It's all of our problem. And that's the message that I really wanted to pass on to you today. It seems likely that within this year that the Ukraine-Russian conflict will come to some kind of conclusion. Even when that conclusion comes, I fear that there will be a robust relationship between the DPRK and Russia. I say this because of the personal relationship between Putin and Kim Jong-un. These men have both political goals. And did you see Putin waiting for Kim Jong-un? Usually Putin makes other people wait for him, but not in this case. Putin waited for Kim Jong-un for 30 minutes. Did you also see Putin opening Kim Jong-un's door for his vehicle? This is a special relationship. These are the things that catches my eye. Secondly, they have a treaty. A treaty is a piece of paper, yes, but again, Putin and Kim Jong-un have a real love affair. So I think because of this and national interests of both these countries, that despite a conclusion in Ukraine and Russia, that this relationship will morph into something else. There's a report that visas, excuse me, visas for North Korean students to study in Russia have increased by 12 times. These students might be doing something else than studying in Russia. Maybe they are there to help work and reconstruct some of the damage that has occurred during the war. Anyway, my biggest message to all of you is that North Korea is a world problem that should not be taken lightly, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور
Dr. On Wee Chong, the fourth speaker in today's morning's panel. He's a senior associate fellow and head of the National Security Studies program at the Rajasthan School of International Studies in Nanyang Technological Universities, and he's also adjunct faculty in the Military Studies program at the school constituent unit, and he is Wuchong received a PhD from the Center of the Study of War, State and Society at the University of Exeter, UK. His areas of expertise cover national security, military history, strategic studies, insurgency, counterinsurgency, hybrid warfare, and gray zone conflict. He is the author of Malaysia's Defeat of Armed Communism, the Second Emergency, 1968 to 1989, published by Routledge Publishing House in 2014. His presentation will be under the title Singapore Total Defense at 40, an evolutionary response to hybrid threat and gray zone ambiguity. إذا تفضل الدكتور. إذا ربع ساعة لهذه المحاضرة وهذا العرض. أسعد الله صباحكم جميعا في البداية أود أن
Professor Omar and his wonderful team for their hospitality. So I think for most, their introduction to Singapore will be in this terrible movie, Crazy Rich Asians. And I would say that I've never ever lived like that till touching down in Doha. So I would like to thank the wonderful team over here for their hospitality. So I'm going to just stick to my marching orders and talk about Singapore's total defense and how it has evolved as a response to deal with hybrid threats and gray zone ambiguity. And I understand that I'm standing between you guys and lunch, so I will quickly make just 5 main points. First, I will touch about some of the structural vulnerabilities that Singapore faces and how it has shaped the strategic posture as well as the mindset of strategic behavior of Singapore. The evolution of the pillars of total defense that you see over here. I'll try to provide a working definition of what hybrid warfare is, what the gray zone is, as well as updating it in relation to total defense. I would also touch on the challenges for sustaining total defense in Singapore, and then finally round off by some recommendations for small states. So since 1984, 15th February, it's commemorated in Singapore as Total Defense Day. The fall of Singapore to the Japanese on the 15th of February 1942 and the subsequent occupation years from 1942 to 1945 was an experience from which one key lesson was drawn, that Singapore must have a robustly self-reliant armed forces capable of independent deterrence. So total defense was something which was adapted from the comprehensive defense strategies of Switzerland and Sweden, and it was formally introduced as a national defense concept to rally the nation should Singapore face external military aggression or conventional war. So just to give you a sense of the sense of vulnerability, a picture always tells 1,000 words, and if you look at how Singapore is usually represented on any world map, it's a dot. So in this case, the dot is a pinhead. So if you sort of look at this, you have the Koreas on the top, Taiwan as you see over here, and then Singapore, literally a pinhead on the dot. So I think this gives you a very good idea on where Singapore gets its inherent sense of insecurity, which stems primarily from its geographical location, its small size in terms of land mass, population, and virtual lack of resources, as well as strategic depth. So to provide a context, if you look at the physical land mass of Singapore, it's about 15 times smaller than Kuwait. Than Qatar, 15 times smaller than Qatar. But its defense budget, it's the largest in Southeast Asia. So there is this very consistent strategic posture that Singapore takes, which is to avoid a feast and famine approach to national defense. And therefore, if we look at its defense spending, it has always consistently been 3 to 5% of its GDP, right? And right now, I think they are in the midst of debating the budget, but as it stands, last year, Singapore's defense budget was $15 billion, highest in Southeast Asia, but if you look at in terms of relative context, it's about 3% of GDP, so it falls within that 3 to 5% bandwidth. And one question that I get asked a lot is, why does Singapore needs a blue water navy when it has barely any territorial waters? And I'll talk about this a little bit, because if you look at the context of Singapore, it has a near complete reliance on overseas sources for existential needs, such as food, fuel, and a large part of its water supply is also a reflection of its larger vulnerability and the potential of what may happen if those sources might be disrupted, as well as access to the maritime global commons that you see over here that Singapore depends on for most of its trade and import of existential needs that would have to pass through its neighbors' territorial waters. And also there is also the fact that Singapore is a diverse multicultural society, and there are potential fault lines that can be exploited to weaken Singapore's social cohesion. So all these vulnerabilities, I would argue, are very much inherent in Singapore's geographical location, its smallness, as well as its societal makeup that provide the basis for its security planning, defense doctrine, as well as strategic posture. And it's also susceptible to global shocks because, as I said earlier, of Singapore's dependence on free trade and the global economy for its existence. So this is seen as a major vulnerability and a need for a comprehensive approach to national security when crisis or disruptions hit. And now I will sort of briefly go through how total defense, 6 pillars are conceived in Singapore. So this actually straddles all the domains, all the dimensions of national security strategy. First, you have military defense. It's very much premised on a strong and credible armed forces to deter aggression, and national service, which I mentioned earlier, is seen as a major pillar. So if you look at the population of Singapore, it's about 6 million, but 60% are citizens, and of that, 60%, it draws its reserve, where you draw its reserve force from. Reservists like me constitutes about 250,000 men, and that is literally seen as the bedrock of Singapore's military defense capability. So you have military defense. You also have civil defense, which is being alert to threats and being effective as first responders. And then you have economic defense, which is strengthening the competitiveness, attractiveness, and resilience of Singapore's economy, which would allow it to recover quickly in any crisis that would cripple its economic systems. Social defense, it's about building understanding and trust amongst people of all races and religions and looking out for one another during times of national crisis. And then you have psychological defense, which is about the will to defend a way of life and resolve to stand up for Singapore and fighting spirit to press on and overcome crisis. And finally, you have digital defense, which is the ability to protect online and remain resilient and cohesive as a nation. So collectively, these are the 6 pillars of total defense. And I will talk about how total defense has really evolved over the years in the last 4 decades in Singapore. So from the 1980s to the 1990s, it's about rallying the nation and mobilizing all resources behind the armed forces and national service as an institution in the event of military aggression. So on Total Defense Day, as you see over here, there is this rite of passage whereby you have conscripts receiving their weapon from their commanders all across the island on sites of historical significance. So this is affectionately known as the chopsticks in Singapore for reasons you can see over here. And this is the memorial that commemorates the civilian war dead in Singapore. So on Total Defense Day, all throughout the island, you have conscripts sort of going through this rite of passage or ritual. So total defense is actually taken very, very seriously in Singapore. But even during the 1980s, there was this realization that total defense has to be more than just military defense. And so there was sort of this move towards greater resilience and a whole of nation response. So one of which was the disruption caused to Asia writ large by the Asian financial crisis of 1997. And also there was the backdrop of 9/11, which sort of provided total defense with a framework on how to deal with transnational terrorism as well as homegrown lone wolf attacks. And let me sort of provide a little bit context for this. So in October 2001, members of a Jemaah Islamiyah group planned multiple bomb attacks on specific targets in Singapore, which included the American, Israeli embassies, as well as the Australian and British High Commissions, and also facilities, naval facilities in particular, used by the US Navy and commercial buildings with American interests. And these planned attacks by Jemaah Islamiyah, they were foiled by Singapore's Internal Security Department, and 36 persons were arrested during ISD's operations against the Jemaah Islamiyah group. So ISD is the Internal Security, Singapore's Internal Security Department for short. And since the fall attacks in 2001, the terror threat to Southeast Asia and Singapore has remained high. And even last year in 2024, the Singapore Terrorism Threat Assessment Report released by the Ministry of Home Affairs stated that while there is no indication of an imminent attack, the terrorism threat to Singapore remains high. And so the message that has been very consistent is not if, but when, and that Singapore can expect a terror attack at some point has been consistently maintained. So in the context of terror threats, total defense is invoked not to only psychologically prepare the population for that eventuality, but also galvanize a collective societal response in the event of a terror attack. And finally, I would like to talk about COVID-19. So this is also where total defense was invoked. But in this case, it was applied as a sort of a whole of nation and whole of government response to COVID, where a ministers-led multi-ministry task force supported the Home Front Crisis Executive Group and crisis management groups to oversee as well as to oversee and coordinate Singapore's whole of government response. And as part of the wider whole of government effort, the armed forces was stood up to assist the Ministry of Health in call center operations and support screening measures at immigration checkpoints, as well as joint teams that work with the various security agencies to contain the spread of COVID-19 in foreign worker dormitories. And now I would sort of touch on how total defense have sort of evolved to keep up with the ever-changing threats of hybrid warfare in the gray zone. So I think all of you are very familiar with the fact that when we try to define what hybrid warfare is, as well as what the gray zone is, it can be sort of a moving target. So I'll just sort of try to contextualize what hybrid warfare is and gray zone conflict is for the purpose of this discussion over here. So in the Asia-Pacific region, multidimensional approaches to strategy, including no-holds-barred statecraft, stems from an older tradition that predates modernity. For example, I think this approach resonates with Sun Tzu's dictum of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting, or indirect strategy, for lack of a better word. So I think in the case of the changing character of hybrid warfare in the Asia-Pacific region, it's the blurring and pushing of boundaries in this war conflict peace continuum that various actors, both state and non-state, try to push to gain relative advantage. But I would make the argument that we see the changing character simply because its impact is a lot more apparent in the light of increased Sino-US competition. So in the context of Singapore, Singapore's Defense Minister Ng Yen Hien, as far back as 2015, sort of tried to conceptualize hybrid warfare in the case of our region, which is an orchestrated campaign to fracture the solidarity of a target nation through undermining its defenses in civil, economic, social, psychological, and military spheres. And as recent as 2014, last year, Singapore's Prime Minister Lawrence Wong said that it's going to be a far, far more dangerous world, too fast. And it reflects the state of the world, one where established norms are fading and where multilateral institutions are weakening. And that is why we are seeing growing zones of impunity where state and non-state actors are able to push for what they want with little or no consequences. And what about updating total defense in the Singapore context for hybrid warfare and gray zone conflict? So like we mentioned earlier, there is a potential of hybrid warfare, especially exploitation of the information sphere to weaken and fracture solidarity, as well as the use of information campaigns via local proxies to influence outcomes without the use of direct coercion. So in the case of Singapore, there has been this attempt to improve capabilities to tackle the growing challenge of hybrid threats. For example, joint incident response with various security agencies and significant investment of cyber defense capabilities. So in 2022, Singapore actually established its fourth service, the Digital Intelligence Service, alongside the Army, Navy, and Air Force, as well as trying to foster a whole-of-nation approach in dealing with hybrid threats. So there is this series, exercise SG Ready, which simulates disruptions of power, water, food supply, and digital connectivity, as well as trying to prepare businesses for power disruption and phishing attacks. So for this year, I think it is running from 15th of February to 28th of February, and it involves about 800 different units in the security services, as well as businesses and grassroots organizations. Right, so I think this is where I would move off and conclude and talk about some of the challenges, as well as providing certain recommendations for small states. So I think in the case of Singapore, because we may think when something reaches 40 is a very, very useful point of inflection. And I think it's about how do we sort of connect total defense to everyday issues and national security. So when we think about supply chain disruptions stemming from regional and global tensions, it is always not, it cannot not, sometimes it's not always intuitive, especially for your average citizen. So I think this is something that has to be worked on. And we are also seeing the increased sophistication of AI-enabled cyber weapons, especially when we look at disinformation campaigns that undermine social cohesion. And the over-reliance on technological tools can sometimes exacerbate existing inequalities between those with access to technology and those that do not. So here I will make the argument that Singapore has the hardware in the form of sound policies, strong institutions, as well as plans, but it's sort of renewing the hardware to sustain public support and personal connection that is going to be the more challenging, demanding task. And finally, a couple of recommendations for the audience to take away. And like I said earlier, increasingly we are looking at living in an era of no-holds-barred statecraft. So how do we sort of develop responses to hybrid threats? So I think here, this is where we have to look at the range of options below that escalatory threshold, because when you look at hybrid warfare, constantly pushing the boundaries, you don't really want to move to that high-intensity war situation. So how do we sort of develop responses to that? And sort of, I've highlighted earlier, developing multi-dimensional capabilities as well as cross-sectoral competencies is key, because this sends a very clear message to the adversary that, yes, you may try to disrupt our way of life, but we can recover and come back stronger. So here, I think it's really sort of building resilience that is very much the better options, because resilience, you have the capability, the ability to recover, as well as sending that strong signal to the adversary. So to sort of conclude on a final point, I would say that building resilience is actually not just an option for small states, but an imperative, because small states with limited resources, collective resilience is really, really not an option, but increasingly an imperative. So happy to take your questions during the Q&A. Thank you very much.
شكرا دكتور ويتش.
Thank you, Doctor. Actually, the watch shows that we have overrun the time by 3 minutes, but we have started 15 minutes later. We will give another 15 minutes for discussion. Let's start with Dr. Mahmoud here.
Good lectures, really. My first question is to Dr. Fu. Does Taiwan contemplate a peaceful solution with China based on one China in which Taiwan has autonomous status? Bearing in mind it's difficult to trust the policy of the United States to defend Taiwan. Secondly, does South Korea, does Taiwan, what is the balance of trade between Taiwan and China? The balance, economic balance. My question to colleagues from South Korea, does South Korea think to develop nuclear capabilities in order to face North Korea?
شكرا دكتور محمود محارب. دكتور عمر عاشور.
Thank you so much for these fascinating interventions and papers. Very delighted to hear them. Quick question first to Dr. Liu with regards. So from what you just mentioned, I'm trying to infer the military strategy there. So we're assuming now diplomacy failed, deterrence failed, the worst has happened. So from what you have told us, basically, or what I can interpret or infer from what you've told us, it will be more of an attrition, long-range attrition by missiles. And that water barrier, the 100 kilometers, 180 kilometers, you will try to atterr it to have a weaker force that lands on the island, and then there will be some form of resistance on the island. So if you can tell us a bit about the strategy of resistance on the island, that would be great. Bearing in mind that 100 kilometers is huge. To compare, the Suez Canal was about 200 to 350 meters, so that's 300 times more. And still, Egypt had a lot of casualties while trying to cross in October 73 with a surprise factor. In your case, there will be no surprise factor because the ISR is all over. The intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance is all over, so difficult to mass and surprise. For Dr. Chun and Dr. Kim, what do we know about the nuclear doctrine of North Korea? When would they think about employing it at a tactical level, perhaps? And if you, Dr. Chun, if you can elaborate a bit more on how are the North Koreans employed in Ukraine? Thank you. Or in Russia, in this case. Yeah.
شكرا دكتور عمر.
Thank you. Thank you very much for very interesting presentations. I've learned a lot. Have a question to the Taiwanese colleague. I'm from Vilnius, from Lithuania. So we just recently warmed up our relations to a very, very big extent. And I happened to visit Taiwan last year, having a lot of meetings with Chengchi University, including a National Security Council. And, well, we know for the small state to defend against the big adversary, the role of the society is essential. And there was a lot of discussions about the total defense, increasing the role of the conscription, boosting the resilience. And I was just a bit surprised, you know, you talking about this turn that, you know, the society is sort of opening up to their relationship with China, potentially. And I was just wondering, were there any changes in the policy direction or how this boosting the societal resilience working at the moment, and what are the steps to strengthen the conscription system in Taiwan? Thank you.
شكرا الزميل هناك.
Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. I am as a military from Ukraine. Have the question for my colleague partners, I expect from South Korea. We have the direct evidence of North Korea participating in the coalition with Russia in the Russian-Ukrainian war. 12,000 of North Korea military, huge amount of ammunition, rockets, etc. In this manner, North Korea military gains the experience in the real modern warfare. In this manner, North Korean weapons is being tested in the real battlefield. So my question for you, are you going to do the same? And what would you like to assist Ukraine in this war? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to comment?
Hey there. Thanks for a really interesting panel. Just a question to the whole panel, and indeed, you know, kind of to the whole conference. One of the trends in warfare over the last 25 years has been the growth of urban operations, urban warfare, and we've not really discussed it at all. And I just wondered if I could ask the panel whether in any of the three examples we've had, the issue of urban warfare, using urban areas for defensive purposes, was anything that was being contemplated by governments and militaries in the three respective powers. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for the very impressive presentations. My question to Dr. Fu, Taiwan. How you evaluate the experience of Singapore of Hong Kong after return to the mainland to China, and is it can be encouraging for Taiwan to go to the same way in dialogue with China? Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا الزميل هناك.
I speak to Arabic. Dr. Fu and General Insoo, I speak to Arabic.
I will speak in Arabic if you don't mind. Dr. General, you have given two pieces of important information. Dr. Fu said that South Korea, no matter how strength they have, we are aware of the fact that we can't defeat the Chinese military, the Chinese military. the general there also has divided the countries with regards to cyber capabilities to two: America, Israel, North Korea, and China. Or Russia, I believe. I can't remember. Anyway, so South Korea wouldn't be able to prevail on its own. Yes, Taiwan. So Taiwan wouldn't be able to prevail alone to gain victory against China. So my question is, do you trust your allies who have supported you over the past periods, chief among which are the United States? I'm not talking about throughout the presidential administrations, but particularly during the Trump administration, as follows. When Trump was president, some obligations or legal obligations have been forfeit, such as the Iranian nuclear deal, and Trump has withdrawn. Now, regardless of the credibility of such withdrawal, the legal obligation stands that the United States have withdrawn. Also in Ukraine, we have been hearing recently that the United States is withdrawing a little bit from supporting Ukraine. The question now is what criteria that would govern the criteria for your sustainability and continuity in peace over the next, the new presidential tenure, if China, in case China attacked Taiwan, would Taiwan be right in trusting the United States? General Som, you have spoken about that North Korea is superior in cybersecurity, and therefore you have placed North Korea as part of future forces, being the third or fourth country around the world in terms of cyber superiority. Would this impact security and stability in South Korea? I'm sorry. Thank you.
View of social science analysis. The first one to Professor Kim, and that is regarding events in early 2005. We witnessed in March 2005 South Korean jumping off bridges, cutting their fingers, and some of them committing suicide because of the Dokdo island that Japan has claimed. Now, that has raised an anomaly because within the same month, North Korea just succeeded in in testing very critical nuclear weapon, and there was no move by civil society of any sort. So definitely a nuclear weapon from the north is more threatening than rocky islands that only birds live on, and still the civil society in South Korea was moved more as a result of the Japanese. This fissure is not shared at the political class. The political class sees itself that it is in line with Japan, given the umbrella of the United States. So my question to you, how big is the fissure between the political class in South Korea and the civil society in South Korea in this conundrum of Japan, Korea, and North Korea? My other question, which is social science question to General Chun, I really learned a lot from your analysis of the caste system, but how come, for example, Kim family has succeeded while many dictators in the world, like the Assad family in Syria, has failed? Could it be that 1.5 million North Koreans were wiped out during the Korean, what you call the Korean War from 1950 to 53 by US bombers, that civilians were so many killed at mass scale that many historians called it war crimes on behalf of the US Army. And therefore, that has precipitated the readiness of the civil society to see the Kim family as their savior. So the dynamics has backfired. With that, would you accept that explanation of the success of the Kim family in establishing the very well-described caste system that you have described? Thank you.
شكرا دكتور إلياس. الزميلة هناك الأستاذ.
Thank you so much. I just have a small question when it comes to the presentation about Singapore. What do you refer for when you're talking about collective resilience and why it's hard? And can we expect Singapore to have a military cooperation and defense with its neighboring countries? Thank you.
شكرا. طيب. We have a lot of questions, but unfortunately we don't have a lot of time. So I'm giving each speaker like four minutes for responding, and hopefully we can complete discussion in the break, during the break. Okay.
Thank you very much for those very instrumental questions. Actually, I have recorded down 6 questions, but every one of the questions referring to even more questions. I only have 4 minutes. So if I cannot touch upon the question here, please maybe we can have a coffee together later. I will definitely want to come with that. The first one, Dr. Mahomo, your question about One China principle. This one is complicated. I will invite you and Anthony. We can have a coffee together for that. And Dr. Omar asked a very serious question. I would very much like to elaborate a little bit. Basically, looking into the context, Taiwan is now from the short-term ballistic missile developed. Now we are moving into medium range because from military sense, currently we are not expected to see Chinese firing ballistic missile because they have already come with multi-launchers. Army already developed this rocket system, reach 400 kilometers. So simply they can line up these rocket forces along Fujian provinces right across the Taiwan Strait. They can reach every corner in Taiwan. With this rocket system, it is impossible to intercept by our missile. And just counting on the cost, this is impossible. And the multi-launcher rocket system, as always, if they fire, it will come as a group, not as one missiles. So this is something, but for strategic purpose, we have come with this cruise missile system. We can fire beyond 1,500 kilometers and now extend it to 2,000 kilometers. So this is one part of the asymmetric warfare strategy. But looking into geographic features, as you mentioned, I cannot compare with Suez Canal. But here in Taiwan Strait, even if it looks more than 100 kilometers, but for Chinese military, it is not something difficult for them. But fortunately, there is an update for everyone. People are still referring to traditional amphibious landing attack. But after all these decades, Taiwan has become very industrialized. Along the western coast of Taiwan, we have built expressway. So for traditional amphibious marines, when they land, even if they can land, they cannot launch, stretch up into further from there. They would have to find the tunnel under the bridge, under the expressway. So then it would be very difficult. Currently, in the military sense, there are only 2 red beaches which would be available for military to conduct traditional amphibious attacks. So currently, if for these red beaches, we will deploy very intensive missile surrounding that particular region. And I think maybe referring to some of the question here, I think this is critically important. Taiwan is trying to get ourselves well prepared, but we know we are not going to defeat this another superpower with this aggressive military. So that is a reason why I concluded by suggesting we need to utilize political means rather than military means. Because another question referring to whether international support would be reliable, I should say, especially under Donald Trump, this is questionable. But people believe maybe as long as we can pay sufficient, the assistance may be possible. But Donald Trump's way of doing business in the last month or so already reminded our decision maker and Taiwanese people, we may be able to continue receiving the support from the United States, but with heavy costs, we have to pay. But as long as the pay may guarantee our security, why not we should go for, we shouldn't go for that. But of course, the picture would be more complicated. The worst scenario is Donald Trump may jump beyond Taiwan to discuss with President Xi Jinping. That may be something unpredictable. I also want to quickly refer to colleagues from Lithuania. Dr. Margarita, yes, thank you. Last month, I just met your former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Gabriela Landsbergis, who visited Taiwan. I was fortunate to have had such a long discussion with him. And I think I share very much with him and also probably with your idea. For smaller players in the world, we need to go through our network, build the strength. This is an unprecedented time. We need to work together, share our best part of technology, and also our way of defensive posture, so we can learn from each other. When you have an advantage, we should learn from you. And if we would have something, we are definitely welcome to be shared with others. So I once again appreciate Dr. Omar to invite to organize such conferences. Perhaps this would be an outcome or byproduct after this conference. The project, of course, producing a book, but except that the network should be continued and should be strengthened further. So I'm sorry that I may not be able to cover with the limited time frame. Anthony's question, urban warfare, definitely there would be some criticism I would have supplying to you, to our government, because our government is now with this urban warfare idea developing something quite unprofessional, which I consider unnecessary to build militia in our society. So I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Fu, Dr. Kim.
Yes, all questions that I received are important and insightful. But as you know, we have a limited time, so I'll give you quick answers, and I would like to discuss more after the session. So regarding the nuclear capability, so actually South Korea is a member of a non-proliferation treaty member, and then we would like to follow international law. So even though there are lots of public opinions that South Korea should equip the nuclear weapons, so officially South Korean government don't pursue nuclear capability. But under the Cold War era, the United States deployed its own nuclear weapons on Korean soil. But during the North Korean nuclear crisis in the late 1980s and early 1990s, 90s, United States withdrew their nuclear weapons from Korea. So there are lots of voices that South Korea must ask the United States to deploy its nuclear weapons again on Korean soil. The second, so the question from Omar. So, so I would like to say that South Korea's defense system alone are insufficient to neutralize the North Korean threat. For example, South Korea has a three-axis system, but the kill chain system is vulnerable to North Korean submarine infiltration. But North Korea operates a sizable fleet of conventional submarines, which can launch submarine launch ballistic missiles. And North Korea also appears to be developing hypersonic missiles capable of evading South Korea air and missile defense system. So it is in South Korea's core interest to prevent Russia from undermining its deterrence capability against North Korea. But if my understanding is correct, the new doctrine, the honeymoon between Russia and North Korea will strengthen North Korea's capability to reduce our deterrence capability. So it is our serious security concern. So the question from my colleagues from Ukraine. So yes, it's true. North Korea's participation in Ukraine should be a serious threat to South Korea. In 1960s and 1970s, South Korea sent troops to Vietnam, where South Korean soldiers accumulated the combat experiences. So we usually say that this experience improved our combat effectiveness against North Korea in the 1970s and 80s. But even though the North Korea's participation in Ukrainian war is a serious threat, so South Korean government have no official policy to engage in the Ukrainian war other than providing non-combat materials. So, but recently I got a mail from Ukrainian embassy, Korean embassy to Ukraine, asking for the cadet exchange between Ukrainian Military Academy and Korean Military Academy. So I reported this letter to Ministry of National Defense and waiting for their answer. So I believe that we will have a more opportunity to train, educate the future military officers together. And finally, the civil society issue. So South Korea has kind of a polarized politics. So we have the multi-party system, but usually two parties, one Liberal Party and Conservative Party, usually seize power by turns. When Liberal Party seizes power, they usually implement reconciliation policy toward North Korea because their ideology is based on kind of nationalism. It means that they assume the hostile attitude toward China. But whenever a conservative party seizes power, they give priority to United States and Japan to deter North Korean threat together. So I hope this explanation to satisfy your inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chun.
Yeah, so 7 out of 10 Koreans want their own nuclear weapons. 9 out of 10 Korean experts think that we should have our own nuclear weapons. If you tell the Korean public that we will be faced with severe economic sanctions, that number goes down to maybe 4 or 5. But still, a considerable number of people feel that we need our own nuclear weapons. I personally advocate that we must, we must never exchange the Korea-US alliance for nuclear weapons. What that means is we must not go behind the back of the Americans. But I still feel that there is hope that we can convince the United States of the advantages of South Korea having its own nuclear capability, nuclear weapons capability. Now, before that, we Koreans have a serious problem. We have 26, 28 reactors, and all the spent fuel is just being stockpiled, and we don't have any more places to stockpile it in. So we need to have some sort of reprocessing agreement with the United States. And when we have that reprocessing agreement, it will increase our capability for the possibility of weapons use, which is something that we don't want to do yet, but it's where we are. North Korean nuclear doctrine. I think the only man in the world that has a red button on his desk is Kim Jong-un. So he has absolute power and authority on North Korean nuclear weapons. Having said that, there is a dead man's hand, which means if Kim Jong-un is taken out, if their command and control system is destroyed, local commanders would have the authority to launch a nuclear device. Whether this is true or not, this is a concern that I have. Although the North Koreans first said that they would not use nuclear weapons first, they said it was for self-defense. They changed their mind once they seemed to have enough nuclear weapons. They're now saying if there's an imminent threat that they would use nuclear weapons first. So we're not sure where it is, but any credible military planner would assume that they would use nuclear weapons, and this is bad news for everybody. For my Ukrainian friend, me personally, I am ashamed that as a free nation that we are not supporting you with military arms. If it was up to me, I would send you ammunition, tanks, everything that you would need to defend yourselves. But the reality is we cannot do that. The reality is that South Korea is by legally bound that we cannot sell weapons to a warfighting area, so you must understand. But we do send a lot of non-war material to Ukraine. And I believe once the fighting has concluded, South Korea will be a considerable contributor in the rebuilding of your nation. And hopefully that will ease my conscience anyway. Urban fighting. The smart rule is don't fight there, right? Don't go in there. But we should really do more because of the issue of the mega cities that now occupy a lot of the continent. So we need to figure that one out. The challenges that we've seen in recent fighting in urban warfare highlights what one must do. And again, for me, it just tells you, don't go in there. Cyber capability is a real serious problem. The North Koreans have conducted many attacks into South Korea. That's why we're really good at defending against a cyber attack or cyber or hacking. Our limitation is we cannot attack North Korea because we are a rule-based legal, we adhere to legal standards. The North Koreans do not. And because of this, they have a free hand. And you cannot imagine how they train their cyber warriors. It starts from age 10. You know that caste system that I talked to you about? It will never change. Only a child with super duper mathematical capability, that child has the opportunity to up the caste system. That's how they're treating their cyber capability. I just also want to mention that if China provokes Taiwan, and we do have a situation, we Koreans sound like we are reluctant to get involved. But I see no choice but to fight alongside the United States. And so I pray that that kind of situation will not happen. You know, it's very interesting what you said about war crimes. The biggest war crime, like in Ukraine right now, is that somebody started a war, Putin in this case. In 1950, Kim Il-sung, whatever his goal was, to unify the country. Maybe he thought he could do it in a month, I don't care. But he started the war. It led to 10% of the Korean people getting killed. Now, if the Americans bombed North Korea, hey, I'm a military guy, fine, we should do it again, you know. The war is evil and bad. Nobody should start it. But the next thing is a long war. Any war that's more than 3 days is a bad war. So for me, bomb it, do whatever you want, except nuclear weapons. Let's do that. How does Kim? How are they successful? Like I said, you know, very systematic. You should study it if you want to become a dictator. Thank you.
Dr. Chong?
Yeah, so first I'll provide a quick response to Anthony's question and then tackle the one on collective resilience. So I agree with the general to go in there. Especially, I think there's this commonality amongst all the panelists is that we all rely on conscript forces. I think if you have a conscript that's going to be with you for 2 years and then go into the reserves, there's only so much that you can do. And we all understand the complexity of what urban warfare is. So it's not just terrain to be shaped, right? Because when we train soldiers, they look at it, especially in the army, as terrain, right? So I think increasingly we have to look at urban systems as an ecosystem. But then, we are cognizant of what you can really do with a citizen army. There are certain things that you can and cannot do as compared to a professional force. So yeah, I think, we need to be prepared as best as possible as we can, but yeah, don't go in there if you don't have to. And I think, the question on collective resilience is a really, really good one because the way in which Singapore is looking at it is still very much inward-looking, as in focus on national resilience and societal resilience. But as we know, we are living in a world where the impact of what happens to our immediate neighbors will happen to us, especially for a small state like Singapore that depends literally on its relevance vis-a-vis the larger world for a living. With regards to a regional response, I think this is where we really need to strengthen collective resilience as a region rather than looking at our own individual nation states or society. So I think that is a really, really good way of looking at collective resilience instead of focusing inward but looking outward as well as a region. I think this is where perhaps we can learn more from the Gulf region because, as you know, Singapore is a member of ASEAN and it's very diverse, Southeast Asia as compared, a lot more diverse than the Middle East. But absolutely, I think this is where small states have agency and perhaps can take a lead in building greater regional resilience because, like I said, it's an imperative and not an option. So yes, this is something that I think small states should look further into. How do you use small states agency to build greater regional resilience?
طيب شكرا جزيلا.
جمعية. I would like to thank you, of course, I would like to thank Dr. Omar Ashur and the technical and the strategic studies unit. And I also would like our 4 panelists, Dr. Fu-Kuo, Insoo, Kim, Inbum, Chun, Onwi, Chong. I have learned a lot from this panel. I would like to
informed by the conference, the organizers, that the time of the break has been reduced to 10 minutes instead of 15 minutes. So see you in 10 minutes and please join me all to just give an applause.